all our learners. Welcome to CEC lecture. The topic of analysis is poverty and global politics. Dear learners, in this lecture, we shall attempt to define poverty. We shall also look at the various views, debates that have a bearing with reference to causes of poverty, and then take the discussion forward towards the explanation that why poverty is an important topic in the global arena. In this lecture, we should also look at poverty and its relationship with inequalities, impact of globalization on various arenas wherein there is a debate that whether it has led to increase or decrease of poverty and inequalities, and looking at the big picture of well-being and human security in the discourse of poverty. To begin with, how do we define poverty? We take reference to the definitions presented by United Nations. Poverty is defined as inability to obtain choices and opportunities. Poverty is an economic state where people are experiencing scarcity or the lack of certain commodities that are required for the lives of human beings, like money and material things. Poverty, dear learners, we must understand that it is a multifaceted concept. It includes social, economic, political elements. Now, as we take the discussion forward, we take reference to the definition presented by the World Bank. According to the World Bank, poverty is pronounced as deprivation in well-being. As we are discussing on poverty, the concept of poverty line is very important. Poverty line implies, that is, it's an idea of generating an amount of income that is appropriate to ensure a minimum standard of living for an individual. Poverty line also signifies the threshold of poverty, that is, below which one's income does not cover necessities. Now, for the purpose of this lecture, we shall focus on 6 types of poverty. There are various types of poverty, but looking at global realms, we delimit the focus of the lecture towards 6 types of poverty, that is, situational, generational, absolute, relative, urban, rural. Dear learners, we shall now have a look at these types of poverty in detail. Situational poverty is caused by sudden crisis or loss and is often temporary. Generational poverty is signified by when families where at least 2 generations have been born into poverty. Absolute poverty implies scarcity of necessities such as shelter, water, food. Relative poverty implies poverty defined in comparison to other people's standing in the economy. Urban poverty, which has a focus towards the metropolitan areas with population of at least 50,000 people. The urban poor deal with a complex aggregate of chronic and acute stressors, that is, crowding, violence, noise pollution, and are dependent on the often inadequate large city services. Rural poverty is situated with reference to non-metropolitan areas with population below 50,000. In rural areas also, there are single guardian household, families have less access often to service support for disabilities, quality educational opportunities, amongst others. Let's now distinguish between absolute and relative poverty. Dear learners, absolute poverty is used to describe a condition where an individual does not have the financial means to obtain commodities to sustain life. On the contrary, relative poverty refers to the standard of living compared to economic standards of living within same surroundings. Now, when we look at the realm of global politics, it was the traditional approach signified by realism and neorealism, which were premised on the notion of state, statism, self-interest, sovereignty. However, dear learners, in the contemporary times, poverty as a subject is an important topic for reflection in international relations. In the present times, there are work in the academia, debates in global and national medias of respective nation states that how states are attempting to address challenges of poverty at a global level in various ways. Let's present to you some facts, and we take these facts from worldbank.org. Dear learners, global extreme poverty, quoting from worldbank.org, it is expected to rise in 2020 for the first time in over 20 years with disruption of COVID-19 pandemic. Another fact, global extreme poverty rate fell to 9.2% in 2017 from 10.1% in 2015. This is equivalent to 689 million people living on less than $1.90 a day. At higher poverty lines, 24.1% of the world lived on less than $3.20 a day and 43.6% on less than $5.50 a day in 2017. Once again, taking some interesting facts on poverty from worldbank.org, that is in 2018, 4 out of 5 people below the international poverty line lived in rural areas. Quoting from those facts once again, half of the poor are children. Women represent a majority of the poor in the most regions and among some age groups. Further, almost half of poor people in sub-Saharan Africa just live in 5 countries: Nigeria, Democratic Republic of Congo, Tanzania, Ethiopia and Madagascar. And once again, as we pointed out that we are taking these facts from worldbank.org, that is today more than 40% of global poor live in economies affected by fragility, conflict and violence. Now, as we are discussing poverty, we must also look at the realm of human rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was a milestone document in the history of human rights, ratified on 10 December 1948. Now, poverty, if you look at from various perspectives, it is argued that it is not only deprivation of economic or material resources, but poverty is also a violation of human dignity. Poverty erodes or nullifies economic and social rights, civil and political rights. Once again, quoting from this very important perspective that we got on human rights dimension of poverty from ohchr.org, that is, fundamental recognition is there. That is reshaping international community's approach to next generation of the poverty reduction initiatives. 1994 United Nations Development Programme report introduced a new concept of human security, which takes the paradigm of security, equating security with people. In the same vein, Amartya Sen also argued that development can be seen as a process of expanding the real freedoms that people enjoy, that is, absence of economic opportunities, looking at income insecurity. So, what we see here is that traditionally poverty was measured comparing individuals' income or consumption with some defined threshold below which they were considered to be poor. Now, this was the conventional view, that is, poverty is seen largely in the monetary terms, and this is also that we must take into account starting point for most of analysis on poverty. On the other hand, a second approach, that is the well-being, that is to ask whether people are they able to obtain a specific type of consumption good. Do people have enough food? Do people have enough shelter, health care, education? So, in this approach of well-being, the analyst goes beyond just the traditional monetary measures of poverty. Once again, quoting from the work of Amartya Sen, that well-being comes from capacity to function in a society. Poverty arises when people lack key capabilities, and so they have inadequate income, education, poor health or insecurity, or even low self-confidence. The world system theory, dear learners, which was developed by the sociologist Immanuel Wallerstein, it is an approach to world history and social change. The world economic system, wherein the idea is that some countries benefit while other countries are exploited. This emphasizes on the social structure of global inequality. Now, global economic institutions, that was one of the focus of this modern world system, and how all countries, rich and the poor, together they are caught up in this, that international division of labor, structured set of relations between three types of capitalist zones: core, periphery and semi-periphery. So, focus here on it is that how within this aspect of exploitation by capitalist forces leading to domination and other forms of power hierarchy, poverty also therein needs to be understood within this realm of global economic institutions, modern world system, international division of labor. Thomas Pogge argues that poverty exists due to coercive global order. Quoting from some very interesting works presented by Thomas Pogge, that is on one of his very important work on world poverty and human rights, cosmopolitan relationships and reforms. This is from Cambridge Polity Press. Another of his important work, the first UN Millennium Development Goal, a cause for celebration. This is from Journal of Human Development. Another of his very important work, that is severe poverty as a violation of negative duties. This is from Ethics and International Affairs. Now, when we try to go through various other inputs that Thomas Pogge has presented to us, that poverty exists due to coercive global order. There is a need for spirit of community. Inequality is corrosive, that is how it affects our sense of commitment to the common good. Global poverty is on the rise. Even while average global income is increasing, in general, poor shares of global profits has decreased. Unequal income and wealth distribution have increased, and actual numbers of those living in poverty are larger than what current models suggest. Once again, quoting from very interesting views presented by Thomas Pogge, that is, citizens themselves are responsible for the continued unequal distribution of resources. Also, that there is a need for reassessment of power structures, global arrangements, institutional roles, so that poor can improve their lives and reclaim their human rights. Now, what are the ways to tackle poverty? What are the ways that nations have attempted to tackle poverty? One, of course, is official development assistance, that is aid, followed by trade and investment, United Nations Millennium Development Goals. Now, all of these ways have, of course, yielded benefits, but at the same time, one cannot ignore the disadvantages also. For example, with aid, there is this concept of tied aid. With trade and investment, there is this aspect how rich are favored over the poor. UN MDGs, there is this concept of issue of efficiency and implementation amongst others. Dear learners, globalization, as we know, is a very important phenomena in world politics. It is multidimensional. Taking reference to this very interesting book, that is Globalization and Poverty, edited by Anne Harrison, and some of the very interesting findings that this book presents, that globalization has been associated with rising inequality, namely that poor do not always share in the gains from trade. Though many of the aspects that is relating globalization and poverty are disputed and contested, however, developing countries, as they are becoming increasingly integrated into the world trading system over the past 20 years, world poverty rates also have fallen. However, today one also sees that how would globalization, global phenomena, global policies and institutions, how they exist in a relationship of cause and effect, namely with respect to processes of globalization and poverty. Former World Bank chief economist and Nobel laureate Joseph Stiglitz wrote this very important book, Globalization and its Discontents. In the similar vein, debate on globalization and poverty, how Joseph Stiglitz points out that free market neoliberal agenda has driven the agenda of international institutions. And this globalization no doubt had positive effects, but also one cannot ignore that it led to gains only in selected areas. The gains were not equal for all. To take an instance that how Joseph Stiglitz has been critical of the role of IMF, that is how it served the global economic interests to serving the interests of global finance. Debtor nations fall further into debt, and IMF then, international institutions, therefore, they respond with high interest loans. So therefore, it works out in a vicious circle, which leads to less of spending on social programs. Now, this definitely has an impact on poverty and inequalities too. Now, when we look at international institutions, reducing poverty and inequality are central to United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Also, at the same time, for World Bank's group twin goals for 2030, that is ending extreme poverty and promoting shared prosperity in every country in a sustainable manner. Dear learners, as we are taking the learning forward, we refer to this report from the World Bank, that is Poverty and Shared Prosperity 2020, Reversals of Fortune. The report was in October 2020. It points out that pandemic-related job losses and deprivation worldwide are hitting already poor and vulnerable people hard, while also partly changing the profile of global poverty by creating millions of new poor. Another report, that is Violence Without Borders, Internationalization of Crime and Conflict. This is from World Bank, June 2020. The report has some important perspectives, that is troubling human and economic cause as geographical spillovers of conflicts and crime and political instability intensified. International institutions can play a critical role in stabilizing domestic fragility by moving settlement of disputes away from battlefields and towards global platforms. Now we look at World Social Report 2020. Now, World Social Report 2020 titled Inequality in a Rapidly Changing World. This is from Department of Economic and Social Affairs, United Nations. Now, this book looks at growing inequality in both developing and developed countries and how it could exacerbate divisions and slow economic and social development. More than two-thirds of world population today live in countries where inequality has grown, and inequality is rising again even in some of the countries that have seen inequality decline. For example, if the report takes reference to Brazil, Argentina, Mexico. The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, writing in the foreword of this book, has said, and we quote from that, inequality, income disparities and lack of opportunities are creating a vicious cycle of inequality, frustration and discontent across generations. Technological change, migration, urbanization and even climate crisis can be harnessed for a more equitable and sustainable world, and the solution for it lies therein allowing macroeconomic policy to focus on reducing inequality and tackling prejudice and discrimination. So, dear learners, as we try to understand the issue of poverty and the issue of global politics, we must focus in the important perspectives the world has seen today. How today the context of global world is much more multifaceted. The focus is just not on one aspect of security, but when we look at economic security, individual security, group security, all of it has a bearing with respect to lack of income, opportunities, jobs, as well as the bigger picture of well-being. Seen in this regard, today global inequality has a very important bearing with respect to global issues and various matters concerning global governance. Dear learners, we hope the lecture provided you significant insights for the topic of discussion. We look forward to positive feedback from you all. Thank you very much for being with us.